Ladies and gents, welcome to this year's Twingo Cup, the support race for round 2 of the Formula Nations Grand Prix. And oh boy, it sure is a packed field. Now this race is actually 2 races in 1. And the teams are all set up to qualify for the top position. Also, I apologize for the last video for having the volume too loud. That's why I put the disclaimer. But I've learned my lesson and decided to turn down the volume for those noise-sensitive people out there. But anyways, let the qualifiers begin! First up is White Angel Motorsports, driven by the one, the only, Rena Hayami. And yeah, she is one of the few fictional female drivers, and she's actually pretty good. She's hoping to get a seat in the Japanese team of Formula Nations. Alrighty, let's see how well she does. Yeah, Rena Hayami wanted to get out of retirement just to enter the Twingo Cup. And here she goes into the first corner. She's actually doing pretty well. And yeah, one of the teams is also driven by, yep, you guessed it, her rival, which we'll explain in a bit. Yeah, she is doing incredible out here. But she's far from perfect though. Yeah, she's a bit rusty. Yeah, still doing pretty good. And look at that! She definitely is doing a good job of getting the power down in the Kumo curve and the bit curve. Yeah, and here comes the ITT Bogan, which you can't take flat out in the Pro Cup cars. Yeah, this is a shortened version of the Nurburgring GP circuit. Yeah, and into the final corner. Here we go. And across the line. Up next is the Great Lakes Racing Club Autosport Pro Cup team, driven by Bertrand Dubois. And think of him as like a Casagrande's version of Bobby Fletcher, except French-Canadian, yeah. He's kind of like Guy Gagné, except not nearly as arrogant. Although, he is a pretty good IMSA driver. He's done pretty well in IMSA, according to the storyline. Here he goes to the first corner. Yeah, keep in mind, these SuperTech Twingo F4s or Mechachrome Twingo F4s are very fast and teach you things like throttle control and power management. Yeah, these cars are very fast and a step up from the Twingo Cup. Yeah, here he goes. Here goes Bertrand. Yeah, got a bit loose there, but saved it. Yeah. GLRC Autosport is also one of the few teams that has, well, that also has a Twingo Cup entry. Yeah, and here he goes into the ITT Bogan. Yeah, and into the chicane, the Vidal chicane. Yeah, just barely screeching the tires. Yeah, and into the final corner. And across the line. Up next is the Twingo Race Shop Pro Cup entry, which of course is the guest entry for this race. And this car is driven by Rudy Maurer, who is one of the top dogs at the VLN according to the storyline. And yeah, she's also good friends with Bobby Fletcher. Yeah, she's taught her some various tricks. But let's see if she can handle one of these Twingo Pro cars. Yeah, here she goes into the first corner. Yeah, and she's trying to short shift to avoid wheel spin because these cars have immense wheel spin. Yeah. Not as good as you would expect though, especially from a celebrity driver. Keep in mind, there is bound to be a different paint scheme for whatever driver they decide to throw in. So, this car could look different for each and every race. And yeah, she's doing pretty good. Yeah, especially when it comes to the Kumo curve and the bit curve. Yeah, and into the ITT Boken, which she tries to take flat out, but just quits. Yeah, and into the Vidal chicane, here she goes. Into the final corner. And across the line! Up next is RTX Racer driven by Mick Bloom, who in himself is a fictionalized version of Mick Schumacher, who is the son of Michael Schumacher, and according to the storyline is also the son of Mike Bloom, aka Michael Bloom. That's Bloom spelled with B-L-U-M-E, by the way. Yeah. RTX Racing has yet to win a championship. Hopefully this year will be their breakout season, especially with Mick Bloom at the helm. Yeah, he's doing pretty well. Yeah, keep in mind, you're gonna see fictionalized versions of real-life drivers in this headcanon as well. They're going to be placeholders for certain real-life drivers. Yeah, he's doing pretty well. Although he's not expected to do well in qualifying because RTX Racing hasn't usually won that many races. And like I've said, they've yet to win a championship, and here he goes into the ITT Bogen and into the Vidal chicane. Yeah, and into the final corner he goes. Yeah. These cars have this excruciating amount of wheel spin. And across the line! Up next is Flamin' Demon Motorsports, driven by Gina Cavalli, who just so happens to be Rena Hayami's rival. And yeah, she just came out of wrist surgery as she had a horrific crash while attending one of the GRI endurance races. Yeah, she had a wrist fracture, and thankfully she's made a full recovery, but she had to miss out on a lot of races. Yeah, and here she goes into the first corner. Yeah, it's kind of strange seeing a race car sponsored by Full Throttle energy drink instead of Monster or Rockstar or whatever. And she's doing pretty well for recovering from a horrific crash. Thankfully, she survived, and you gotta thank the Hans device for saving her life. Yeah, here she goes to the next corner. Man, Gina Cavalli is on fire. She is rocking that Twingo. And no, she's not from Italy, she's actually from Spain. She's a Spaniard, like Alex Palou. Ironic, isn't it? Yeah, and here she goes into the Vidal chicane. Yeah, and into the final corner. And across the line! And we got even more female representation with Melissa Ann Fletcher driving for, yep, you guessed it, RT Nebulous Ray. Yeah, they are one of the lower budget teams. But despite this, they actually do have a junior program known as RT Bosconian. Yeah, and she goes into the straight. Melissa Ann Fletcher is the cousin of Bobby Fletcher. She's from a different side of the Fletcher family. Yeah, here she goes to the first corner. Yeah, she just graduated from the junior team, RT Bosconian. And she's actually doing pretty well. She's getting the power down. But there is some oversteer. Yeah, nobody can be perfect. Yeah, and into the next corner, which leads straight into the Bit curve and the Kumo curve. Because it's a shortened version of the Nurburgring GP circuit. Yeah, a bit of lockup, but she managed it. Yeah, and into the Vidal chicane. Yeah. She always had a good relationship with the Bosconian duo. And here she goes to the final corner. And across the line. Up next is RT Zevius, driven by Little Mac. Yeah, he's talked about wanting to get into Formula Nations to get a leg up on his rivals, especially Don Flamenco and Aaron Ryan and Great Tiger, which he's beaten, but the problem is his age. Yeah, as you can tell, he's 17 years old, and the minimum age to compete in Formula Nations is 18, so he'll have to settle being in the Twingo Cup, which, believe it or not, does have a minimum age of entry of 17 years old. Yeah. He doesn't have very much racing experience, unfortunately. And he finds the RT Zevius cars pretty lackluster. But in the Twingo Cup, every car is the same. Yeah, he's not doing too well. He's trying his best. He just graduated from the Twingo Cup, which had a minimum age requirement of 15 years old or 14 years old, depending on how good the driver is. Yeah, the Twingo Cup has a significantly lower barrier to entry, and here he goes to the next corner. And yeah, Little Mac has been practicing on his racing skills. It's amazing what the boy at the Bronx could do. And yes, he's able to fit in the race car, and here he goes into the Vidal chicane. Yeah, and into the final corner. And across the line! Up next is the Apple Racing Academy Pro Cup entry driven by Zach, who of course is Ivy's partner, who is racing in the number 98 entry. And yeah, Ivy's just 1 year away from finishing her tenure in the Apple Racing Academy Junior entry, which is in the Twingo Cup. Yeah, Zach is... yeah, he's got some learning to do. Yeah, he's getting better, and he's been racing before, but he hasn't been in the racing scene a lot lately. And for those of you who watch the Carmen Sandiego show, yeah, you probably know that by now. Yeah, and he's actually doing pretty good. And if you could see it, well, you probably can't see it because the game doesn't show it. Carmen Sandiego herself is watching in the grandstands. But Gran Turismo 7 doesn't actually show anyone in the grandstands, though. It certainly doesn't show characters from other video games, but just imagine it. And here he goes into the ITT Bogan. Yeah, he's never participated in the Twingo Cup before, and he's got some stiff competition. Especially with the minimum age requirement being 17. And you have to have a lot of experience as well. Yeah, and here goes into the final corner. Trying his best. And across the line! Up next is the Patterson Racing Pro Cup entry driven by Nolan Jones, who is a fictionalized version of Nigel Mansell, as you can probably tell, because, well, anyone who's played Super Mario GP2 knows that every driver in that game, except for Ayrton Senna, is a fictionalized version of a real driver, and I had to come up with that name out of the fly because it's just N. Jones in the game itself. Yeah, and here he goes into the first corner, and keep in mind, Nolan is on his way to retirement. Yeah, this is his final season of the Twingo Cup. He's been racing for years. He's been racing since the Twingo Cup was formed. And he's also raced in the inaugural Twingo Pro Cup season, and he's never, ever left Patterson Racing. He's formed a strong relationship with him, and yeah, it seems he's doing better than expected. Yeah. Zach is expected to take the seat next year, after he graduates from Apple Racing Academy. Yeah, here he goes into the Vidal chicane. And to the final corner. And across the line! And last but certainly not least is Jacques Jules, which is a parody of Jacques Villeneuve, who in itself is a son of Gilles Villeneuve. And according to the storyline, he is the son of Gilles Jules, who died in a horrific crash in 1993. Yikes. Yeah, it kind of reflects the sad death of Gilles Villeneuve, except way later. Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Let's get on to the qualifying, and Jacques is actually doing pretty well. Yeah, it's pretty amazing for a guy in his 50s. He's well past his prime, and he actually surpassed his father. Yeah. And he also has the need for speed. He has the urge to get into a race car and complete some laps. He's also hoping to enter the Lightweight GT Cup at Brands Hatch, which, believe it or not, is the next round, and he's actually doing pretty well. Not bad for an old guy. Yeah, here he goes into the ITT Bogen. Yeah, and into the Vidal chicane. And into the final corner. And across the line. Let's see how well each driver has done. Here are the results. Rudy Bauer sadly has gotten a disappointing 135.543, given that the Twingo Race Shop has spent a lot of time preparing that car for her. Rena Hayami takes the top spot, while Gina Cavalli is in second, and Jacques Jould gets a 133.918. Again, not bad for a guy who's in his 50s. Anyways, on to the Twingo Cup. Here we go. First up is Patterson Racing, driven by Gabriel Hubin, who is the son of, well, Jean Hubin, who in itself is a parody of, aka a fictionalized version of Jean and Lacey, and he's also a fictionalized version of Giuliano Lacey. Yeah, some of these characters are OCs. Get used to it. But anyways, Gabe is doing pretty well, and he's hoping to get a top podium spot. Here he goes to the first corner. Yep, Gabe is flying out there. Yeah, Gabe is one of the top prospects in the Twingo Cup and in junior formula racing. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Yeah, here he goes. He is doing pretty well. Yeah, and into the Kumo curve and bit curve he goes. Yeah, this is a shortened version of the Nurburgring Grand Prix circuit. Yeah, and into the ITT Bogen. And into the final corner. Well, the corner that leads to the final corner, the Vidal chicane. And keep in mind, the Twingo Cup cars are far easier to control as they are much slower and meant for younger drivers. And across the line! Up next is another young prospect character I made up for this series. Ryota Hamano, who is the son of Masahiro Hamano, which again is another name that I had to come up with the fly, and he is also, yep, you guessed it, a parody of Satoru Nakajima's son. Yeah, because every driver in Super Monaco GP has to have a real-life parallel. But anyways, he doesn't usually do too well in the Highway Star equipment. Yeah, Highway Star is known for having lackluster equipment, and it makes sense considering that they're way underfunded. But they're considered by many to be an underdog team. Here he goes. Yeah, Ryota is doing pretty well for, well, Highway Star standards, because they're not usually known for making winning race cars. But he's still doing his best, though. And here he goes into the Bit Curve and Kumo Curve. Yeah, this car is nicknamed Midnight. Yeah, a lot of cars are nicknamed Midnight. And here he goes into the Vidal chicane. Yeah, and into the final corner. Yeah, just barely touching the grass, and he wheel hopped a bit. And across the line! Up next is Orion Lausitz, who we already know is Oscar's uncle. And he's also the guest driver for this race. Well, one of the two guest drivers. He is the guest driver for the Twingo Cup. And yeah, they're known for making fast cars. Well, it is the Twingo race shop after all, so what do you expect? And here comes Orion. Here he goes into the first corner. Yeah. The Twingo Cup is going to keep the next celebrity driver a secret, because they've been making a big deal about her. Yeah, all we know is that she's a female. Yeah, and Orion is doing pretty well as expected. And he seems to be getting the hang of these Twingo Cup cars. Here he goes. Yeah, it's Kumo Curve and Bit Curve. Yeah, the Twingo Cup cars are considerably less powerful than the Supertech / Mechachrome Twingo F4s. Yeah, and into the Vidal chicane. And into the final corner. And just like the Pro Cup entry for the Twingo Race Shop, expect to see a different look for every driver they have. And across the line! Up next is RT Bosconian, driven by Shane Loud, and yeah, he's criticized that RT Bosconian has poorly fitted seats. Yeah, because, well, another driver was supposed to take his place, but he was injured. And who's that driver, you might ask? Well, he was Billy Miller III. Yeah, he is, believe it or not, a son of, well, Billy Miller, or B. Miller in Super Monaco GP. And he had a terrible crash at one of the Gran Turismo World Championship endurance races, and yeah, it really stung for him, but hopefully he'll make a good recovery. Yeah, Shane Loud seems to be doing pretty well, and keep in mind, this seat fit was very last minute. They had to basically do everything they can, and RT Bosconian is not a team with a big budget. Yeah. It sucks for Billy Miller III because, well, he is usually a pretty talented driver, especially when it comes to the GT World Championship. But still, Shane Loud's doing pretty well, and he's into the ITT Bogen. And up next is the Vidal Chicane, one of the most treacherous corners of the Nurburgring GP circuit. And into the final corner. Yeah, pretty impressive for one of the Loud cousins who had to take the place of an injured driver. And across the line. Up next is RT Zevius, driven by another young prospect. But this one is not an OC this time around. Yeah, bet you didn't see that coming. This car is driven by Parr, who is Bobby Santiago's friend. And he really wants to put on a good show for Bobby Santiago, and there will be fistfights in Victory Lane. Well, that is if Parr and Bobby would actually respect each other while racing. And yeah, Parr's doing pretty well. He's got through the Mercedes arena with no issues at all. Yeah, here he goes. Yeah, Parr is not used to driving a race car. This is his first time trying out a race car. Yeah, his biggest competition is Bobby Santiago. And Lenny Loud. Man, there is quite a few Loud House characters in this racing series. Yeah, here goes into the Kumo curve and bit curve. And into the ITT Bogen. And into the Vidal chicane he goes. Man, he is really aggressive on the brakes, but what do you expect? He's Parr. Yeah, it's the final corner. And across the line. Here we go. Up next is GLRC Autosports Twingo Cup entry driven by Bobby Santiago. Yeah, he is known as Boo Boo Bear. And yeah, he's not known for being a skilled driver. But he's a bit more skilled than Lenny Loud. Although, there will be a fight in the podium, but that is if the three don't respect each other. Well, they probably would respect each other in the podium. And here he goes. Pretty impressive, especially for an 18-year-old male. Yeah, this is a guy who you'd think should have been in the Twingo Pro Cup by now, but he hasn't gotten the skill and experience to be in the Twingo Pro Cup yet. But still, it is a start. And yeah, he just barely went off track. Yeah, if you go off track, your lap time will be deleted and it won't count. Yeah, and goes right into the Kumo curve and bit curve. Again, this is a short version of the Nurburgring GP circuit. And here he comes into the ITT Bogen. And into the Vidal chicane he goes. Yeah, he's trying not to overdo it. Yeah, and into the final corner. And across the line. Up next is the Apple Racing Academy Twingo Cup entry driven by Ivy. Yep, I've mentioned this before, but she is on her last year of competing in the Apple Racing Academy. And, well, Shane Loud is hoping to get into the Apple Racing Academy. But as it stands right now, he is a fill-in driver for Billy Miller III. Yeah, he hasn't quite made the jump yet. Yeah, and here she goes into the first corner. Yeah. Ivy will be taking Zach's place next year. And Zach will also be replacing the withered old veteran Nolan Jones. Yeah, and Ivy's doing pretty well. But she hasn't won a race at all. She's yet to win a race in the Twingo Cup, but she had a few podium finishes, and she's fairly decent as a driver. But still, Apple Racing Academy has yet to win a championship. Well, at least in the Twingo Cup. Yeah, the Apple Racing Academy Twingo Cup entry is just a spin-off of the actual Apple Racing Academy team, which has won 4 championships with some exceptionally talented drivers. And here she goes into the final corner. Yep, and across the line she goes. Up next is Team Loud, driven by, yep, you guessed it, Lenny Loud. And yeah, she had gotten Lori Loud and some of her family members to chip in and build this racing team, and basically build their own race car on a tight budget. Yeah, the Louds are known to be very money conscious, and that's to be accepted. Well, that's to be expected because it's a huge family. Of course, they're gonna be out of money all the freaking time. And here she goes into the first corner. Yeah, Lenny Loud has failed her driver's test more times than not, but she has learned her lesson in how to drive. Yeah, and here she goes. Yeah, she's still learning. But like I said before, there will be a fist fight in the podium. And she's hoping to win this race. She wants to win a race for the family-owned team that had to run on a shoestring budget in the Twingo Cup. They poured their heart and soul into this, and here she goes into the big curve in the Kumo curve. And here she goes into the ITT bogey. Yeah, and here she goes into the Vidal chicane, and keep in mind, Team Loud is not like Apple Racing Academy with big budgets. This is a team on a shoestring budget, and here she goes into the final corner. And across the line. Up next is Vintage 89 driven by Kei Nagase, who was said by many to be Reiko Nagase's long-lost sister. Yeah, just admit it. We've all had that theory of Kei Nagase being Reiko's sister, and it would make sense. And here she goes. Yeah, she's also one of the oldest drivers in the Twingo Cup paddock, as the Twingo Cup is usually a developmental series, but Vintage 89 also runs on a shoestring budget. here she goes. Yeah, she's trying her absolute best with mediocre equipment. Yeah, she's been in fighter jets. And she can handle a Twingo. Yeah, this car is also going for the retro aesthetic and it's also sponsored by Racer Cinema Rentals. The only video store in the world that has a work desk where it has the tapes. Yeah. It was a design decision to keep the work desk. Yeah, here she goes into the Kumo curve and Bit curve. And here she goes into the ITT Bogan. Yeah, this team is so low budget that they've hardly ever won a single race. And here she goes into the Vidal chicane, into the final corner. And across the line she goes. And last but certainly not least is Mach Racer Motorsports. Believe it or not, this car is not driven by Speed Racer himself. It is just a car inspired by the Mach 5. It is driven by Benny Stein, who wants to impress Luan. And yeah, as you can tell, he's a big fan of anime and has based his car on the Mach 5 from Speed Racer. Yeah, he had to basically get a loan just to start this team, but he has claimed a few victories and used the prize money towards his car, trying to improve it. So, again, he's running on a shoestring budget. Hence why he doesn't have a sponsor yet. Yeah, and here he goes. Benny Stein is doing pretty good, and believe it or not, he's just right there at the minimum age of entry for this series, which is 15 because of the age gap in Season 5 that a year has passed. Yeah, he's going straight to the Bit curve and the Kumo curve. Yeah, Benny Stein is also one of the youngest entries in the racing series. Yeah, and again, he just wants to make sure he wants to impress the land loud. He always wants to do it. And he's also hoping to get her into a racing seat sometime. Yeah, and here he goes into the final corner. And where do you think Benny will be in the Twingo Cup? And across the line! And here are the qualifying results for the Twingo Cup at the Nurburgring. And as expected, Oliver Lausitz has a 136.472 and takes the top spot, while Bobby Santiago has a surprising 137.353. And Parr also gets third place, which is pretty impressive. Although Lenny Loud is all the way in the back with a 138.186, just barely below Vintage 89. Yeah, that's Vintage 89 Motorsports, to be exact. And Ivy has a disappointing 139.693 and had a bit of wheel hop. Yeah, she was looking to get a good time until she got some wheel hop during the qualifying session. Hopefully she'll do better in the race itself. But anyways, it is time to sign off. And catch you guys next time and peace out.